This is Garis book readings of my 2 published paper books, written by and read aloud by Prof. Dr. Hugo Garis. Email profhugodegaris@yahoo.com. Website profhugodegaris.wordpress.com. This is Chapter 4, Part 2 and beyond, taken from my book, The Artilect War, Cosmists versus Terrans, a bitter controversy concerning whether humanity should build godlike, massively intelligent machines. Two, the scientific religion argument. I am not at all religious in the traditional sense. I look upon traditional religions as pre-scientific superstitions. They are quite incompatible with what modern science teaches us about the way the world is. My level of scientific learning and my critical, cynical scientific mind cannot accept such doctrines which, in my opinion, cannot hold up to critical scientific and analytical scrutiny. Yet, as I get older, I'm now in my late 50s as I write this. Now, let's see, this book was written in 98. So, in a week or so I'll be 70 as I read this. I find myself getting increasingly interested in religion, but not because I find the traditional beliefs any less incredible, but because I feel I have a greater understanding of the religious impulse. I find myself thinking more about the deeper aspects of human existence, about the bigger things besides the day-to-day distractions that seem increasingly petty to me. Probably the greatest motivator for thinking about such things is the brute fact that so many of my friends are dying. I have quite a lot of friends who are older than I am, in their 60s, since most of them are male, and given the average life expectancy for males in the first world countries is about 75 now. Actually, I think now, well, it was in Australia at least that I read recently, its life expectancy for males is now over 80. Back to the book. That means it is statistically expected that a growing, non-negligible proportion of them will be dying off in their 60s. My second wife died in 2000. Admittedly, her premature death was largely her own fault, and partly the fault of the cigarette companies. She smoked heavily before she met me and died of lung cancer at the early age of 62, young for a woman. There's nothing like the death of people close to you to make you think of your own mortality. The older I get, the more I reflect on it and read a lot about the biology of death, about why cells age, about the technology of immortality, to get a deeper insight into why we are so terribly mortal. Religious belief is a cultural, anthropological universal, one of the very few, along with, for example, the taboo on incest. The need for religion is very strong, as evidenced by the fact that it is so ubiquitous. My scientific curiosity and scientific knowledge prevent me from being traditionally religious, but the initial craving for some deeper spiritual understanding of human existence and mortality I do feel. I suspect that the scientific hunger I have had since a teenager has a lot in common with what drives a lot of very bright men into theology. I'm a born scientist. I like to read and think a lot about what I call the big scientific issues. For example, evolution and the billions of years it has taken to generate life. About astronomy and its huge time frames and distance scales that dwarf human affairs into insignificance. About the theoretical physics and its conceptual mysteries. How can nature be like that? About embryology and the intricacies of building a body from a single egg. About brain science and the mystery of how thought and consciousness arise from the interaction of billions of neurons, and so on. I like to go to good science fiction movies or to read hard science fiction books, especially those written by professional scientists, hoping to experience a sense of awe, of magnificence, of the big picture of things. As I said earlier, I have many books on astronomy, particularly those with large glossy photos of galaxies with their zillions of stars. I love to ponder them, staring at them, wishing that today's imaging technology were more advanced so that I could experience the emotional rush of looking at a 3D holographic image of deep space, of a spiral galaxy. Filling my living room with an image as authentic as if I were in deep space myself. This technology is coming, and when it does, I believe it will create a much deeper sense in the global public mind of what I call space consciousness. By space consciousness, I mean the awareness of how huge our universe is and how insignificant our human lives are in comparison. It would create a sense of religious awe in most of us, I believe. This new century's media technology will give humanity the wonderful, awe-inspiring 3D images I mentioned above. I believe such images will have more impact on the human psyche than did the first photos of the terrestrial globe that we were sent back from the moon missions in the 1960s. Well, 70s. No, it was 60s. Since we don't have such realistic 3D images yet, it's difficult to imagine the emotions they will evoke. I get a taste of what it will probably feel like from watching certain science fiction movies on a large screen, 2D of course, when one sees the stars in the background. If you live far from the smoggy cities and away from street lighting, and not many people do nowadays, or you are travelling on a cruise ship in mid-ocean, and you will be able to look up at the stars. You will not see spiral galaxies in all their incredible beauty. You'll need a telescope for that. But you will see thousands of twinkling stars. That image alone should make you feel insignificant if you know any science. That is, that each of those twinkling white dots up there is the sun, probably with its own planetary system. It's now thought that most stars have a planetary system, and that they've been twinkling away for billions of years in most cases. It's a humbling experience, is it not? Now imagine that you're living a few years into the future, and you switch on your 3D entertainment system and choose by voice command to your holo viewer a 3D image and room size of a spiral galaxy. A magnificent, breathtaking, awe-inspiring, emotionally engulfing image appears, together with powerful hypnotic music, creating a totally enthralling experience, especially if it's the first time you've seen such a thing. You ask the viewer to zoom in at the bottom right corner and the disc appears closer. You ask for continuous zoom. Gradually the image changes from a foggy mist into zillions of white and multicolored dots of light. You know, these are stars and nebulae. The zoom continues and the dots become more distinct, and some of them grow slightly larger. One particular dot now grows into a small circle as the background mist crystallizes into a spectacular image of millions of clear dots of light in a vast spiral arc. You ask the viewer to zoom in on the growing circle. Some moments later, the size of the circle grows until the room is filled with its light. It's too bright. You ask for less light. You hope that this star has planets. You ask the viewer to see if it has any. The image shifts to the right and stops. You see nothing. You ask for a zoom and a brightening. You see a small sphere. It is a gas giant planet. You zoom in. The planet fills the room, but all you see are multicolored clouds of gas, no surface. You ask the viewer to look for an inner planet. It finds one, a blue sphere similar to the Earth. You get excited. You zoom in and notice the oceans and land masses. It is the Earth. You are disappointed. You continue the zoom so that a particular landmass grows and grows until you can make out a city, then a city block, a park, a young couple having a picnic in that park. Then the palm of the man's hand, then his skin cells, his blood cells, his DNA, then molecules, atoms, a nucleus, a nucleon, a quark, and then the image freezes. You have reached the limits of humans' knowledge. What I've just imagined is not original. A book containing such images appeared some years ago called Powers of 10. It begins with an image of the whole universe, where the galaxies are just tiny dots, right the way through to quarks, where each image, accompanied by an explanatory text, is a zoom in 10 times closer than the previous image. The first time I saw this, it fascinated me. It made me realize how incredibly limited our daily human experiences are when compared to what there is to be seen and understood out there at the macro scale of the universe and in there at the micro scale of the atomic world. Such experiences make me think how limited in scope our normal human lives are. We live in the middle range of these size scales, with roughly as many orders of magnitude that are larger than us than those that are smaller than us. Our human brains have evolved to be preoccupied by those phenomena of similar scales, both in terms of space and time. As humans, we have such a limited view of the world, such tunnel vision, metaphorically speaking. But thanks to our modern scientific knowledge, we know at least that such scales exist. Most of these scales were only discovered within the last 100 years or less. This knowledge generates in me a fascination for science. I find myself caring more and more about what I called above the bigger things than the humdrum of daily existence, which is snuffed out in 80 years or so anyway, due to our evolutionary programming, our programmed death. As I get older, my mortality weighs more and more heavily on my consciousness, making me think that it would be nice to live longer, to be immortal maybe. Humanity could give itself immortality if it wanted to. Mortality is just a molecular program written into our DNA. The DNA in our reproductive cells is immortal and can elaborately self-repair over the generations. It recombines with the DNA of another person during sex and creates a whole, fresh, perfect new body. Bacteria are immortal. Cancer cells are immortal. It can be done. It would mean merely changing the molecular programming in our cells. Life is a program, and so is death. Death can be unprogrammed. Such unprogramming we can have, and probably within a century, as humanity understands more about the molecular biology of how death occurs. If I had the power and the knowledge to make myself immortal, then why not? While I am at it, increase my intelligence as well. The intelligence level I have already allows me to experience the joy of understanding how mysterious and wonderful nature can be at the level of the atomic world. For example, the study of quantum mechanics has always been a joy to me and was the topic of my first research efforts. If I could just increase my intelligence by 10% or so, maybe I could appreciate with less intellectual effort the great beauty in modern string theory that the best of modern theoretical physicists talk so much about lately. If I could increase my intelligence by a further 10%, perhaps I could feel the awe that Einstein said he felt at being able to discover some of the deepest of mathematical relations describing the behavior of the universe. The fact that humanity finds nature comprehensible was always something that he found to be incomprehensible. It truly baffled him. If I continue thinking along these lines, why limit myself to human levels of intelligence? If I can attain godlike powers and make myself immortal and more intelligent, then why not a lot more intelligent, like 10 times more, or 1,000,000 times more, or trillions of times? Why not just turn myself into a god or an Artilect? I then start thinking that if I become an Artilect with 10 to the power 30 components or more, what would be the meaning of I? The original human I would be totally swamped by the vastly greater mass of computational, memorial, and sensorial components. I would no longer be me. I would be a new me, an Artilect. So why bother going through all the transitional stages from human to Artilect? Why not just build an Artilect directly from scratch and treat it as though it were my own child, that is, not me, but my offspring, the creature I created? In a sense, if I become an Artilect myself, and I make this transition quickly, then my old self would die in a sense. My old self would be drowned in and totally ignored by the vastly superior capacities of my new artilectual self. As an Artilect, irrespective of whether I started off as a human being or not, I could do my own powers of 10 travel to a large extent. I could attach all kinds of scientific instruments to my body, integrating them as part of me and observe what I wanted. Assuming that the limit to the speed of light remains in force, I would not be able to travel too far too quickly, but at least I could observe the very small size scales with ease. But with greater intelligence, Perhaps I could discover ways around the speed of light barrier, perhaps by using space-time wormholes and the like, or perhaps by using phenomena that human beings, with the intellectual limitations of human beings, cannot even imagine. It would be nice to be an Artilect, a god, a supremely powerful, omnipotent being. I could be such a creature by late 21st century and beyond. It's possible. It's not an unattainable dream. I am not a poet nor a playwright, so my attempts here to convey the sense of religious awe at becoming an Artilect will need to be expressed in a more emotional and convincing way by real professionals of the arts. And in brackets, I encourage artists to create such artilectual works. All I can do here is attempt to convey some measure of the strength of religious feeling that I and other cosmists will make public this century. Cosmism to me is a kind of religion, one compatible with scientific knowledge, and hence acceptable to my critical scientific mind. It's a scientist's religion. But you don't have to be a scientist to have the same feelings of religious awe when contemplating the potential of what Artilects could be. I may be a scientist, but I'm also a human being, and hence feel the same religious pull as nearly everyone feels at some stage in their lives when faced with the deepest of questions. There's something truly magnificent about the cosmos goal of building Artilects. The Artilect itself is godlike. Building Artilects would partly satisfy in me some deep spiritual quest that I had difficulty defining clearly even to myself. The Artilect is a kind of god to me, of a type that I can believe in, having immense power, and yet one that I and others may help build in the future. That would make me feel powerful, but it's more than just a question of power. It's also a feeling of wanting to go beyond, way beyond, our current human limitations. I'll write more about this shortly. It's also about wanting to leave a mark after I'm dead. It was this desire, I believe, that motivated the pharaohs to build the pyramids. An Artilect would be a magnificent pyramid. Some males become monks in order to contemplate a higher form of existence. I understand the impulse to do this because I share it in many ways, but I cannot go along with the beliefs and lifestyles of traditional monks and nuns, whose lives I feel are wasted in the pursuit of beliefs that to me are pure fictions. To my mind, they lead sexually, emotionally, reproductively, and existentially impoverished lives. I cannot take traditional religions seriously, since they are incompatible with what I have learned about the world. But the impulse to be religious is there and goes unsatisfied. So it probably will not surprise you to learn that the day that the idea of cosmism as a scientific religion occurred to me, I was deeply moved. Cosmism as a religion would satisfy a lot of my spiritual needs, and importantly, would be compatible with my scientific worldview. It would be a scientist's religion, and that for me and perhaps for millions of people may prove to be one of cosmism's strongest attractions. If a lot of scientists feel the same way as I do in the future, then it's more likely that the Artilects will be built. But what exactly is the source of this attraction? If the Cosmists are prepared to risk the start of an Artilect war, and even the extermination of the human species due to the strength of their desire to build Artilects no matter what, just what is it that motivates them so powerfully? What is so godlike about the Artilects that makes Cosmists so committed to building them? Question mark. 3. The building Artilect gods argument. Another very powerful argument the Cosmists will employ is the sheer attractiveness of the prospect of building godlike Artilects. To many Cosmists, this attraction will be compulsive, overriding all others, and motivating any means to achieve this glorious goal, even if the human species has to risk being wiped out as a result. Let me try to convey more clearly and in more detail the godlike qualities that Artilects could have. For further discussion along this line, see Chapter 7 on the Artilect era. If you find yourself mesmerized by what follows, perhaps you'll be a lot more sympathetic to the dreams and obsessions of the Cosmists. An advanced Artilect could be very large, for example, the size of an asteroid. If it were of planet size, it could orbit about a star and absorb its energy. if it were in the shape of a huge hollow sphere with a star at its centre, a Dyson sphere, it could absorb all the radiated energy of that star. If such an Artilect is built in our solar system, the material necessity for its construction could be taken from the asteroids in the asteroid belt, perhaps all of them. So potentially such a creature could consist of 10 to the power 40 or even 10 to the power 50 atoms, and hence bits. The molecular or atomic size switching elements would be flipping from zeros to ones or vice versa, which is a fundamental operation in computing, in femtoseconds, a thousandth of a trillionth of a second. So altogether, the Artilect could be switching at about 10 to the power 55 or 10 to the power 65 bits a second. This is an astronomically large number. Compare this with the equivalent switching rate of the human brain. The information processing of the human brain occurs, arguably, at the synapses, the interneural connections, at a rate of about 10 bits a second. Since there are about 10 to the power 15 synapses in the human brain, that means the total brain processing speed is about 10 to the power 16 bit flips a second. The Artilect's processing speed is thus 10 to the power 40 or 10 to the power 50 times greater, which is trillions of trillions of trillions of times more. Such numbers are so large that it's difficult for human beings to absorb their significance. Let me try to spell it out a bit more clearly. Such creatures would be capable of living the lives of zillions of human beings in a mere second of their existence. A human life of about 80 years, that's 80 by 365 by 24 by 60 by 60 seconds, that is 2.5 billion seconds, computing at 10 to the power 16 bits a second over an average human lifetime. Would process 10 to the power 25 bit flips total. So an asteroid-sized Artilect, for example, with 10 to the power 40 atoms, could process the equivalent of 10 to the power 30 human lives per second. That is, a million trillion lives. That's more than the number of atoms in an automobile. Sheer processing speed is only the beginning. What is truly significant and godlike about the Artilect would be its ability to use that speed in fascinating ways. For example, it could absorb matter into itself from the asteroids and reassemble it into computing material to do whatever task it sets itself. In fact, the above talk of an Artilect performing a single task at a time is probably a joke. An Artilect would probably be thinking a zillion thoughts at the same time. It has the luxury to do so because it has enough matter and speed to allow it to do so. How would the Artilect know how to arrange the matter to think the thoughts it wants? Well, it could employ Darwinian evolutionary experiments on parts of itself and examine the results with other parts of itself. The newly and successfully evolved parts could then be absorbed into its general structure. These experiments could be going on all the time and at incredible speeds. The intelligence level of the Artilect could be increasing astronomically every second. The Artilect could have a huge number of sensors on its surface or interior. It could build artificial life forms and play with them as part of itself, learning about life processes. Maybe some super Artilect is doing this right now with our universe. More on this on Chapter 7. The Artilect would have the means to amplify continuously its intelligence to levels human beings cannot imagine. If intelligence is correlated with processing speed, memory capacity, etc., then obviously the Artilect could be trillions of trillions of trillions of times more intelligent than human beings. For example, imagine it takes an Artilect 1 trillion atoms per computational module to perform some basic task. How many such modules could it have? Trillions of trillions and more. Mouse brains cannot perform certain functions that human brains can because they don't have enough brain modules of appropriate structure. An Artilect's modules could be evolved and deployed to perform zillions of functions while at the same time evolving and restructuring itself. The Artilect would be the consummate scientist. It could manipulate and examine its own matter. It could transform elements, e.g. from oxygen to carbon, from its own body, or just select and use appropriate atoms from its own storehouse, which would also be part of its body. Alternatively, it could convert parts of itself into transporters and fetch material from elsewhere. With the full range of chemical elements, from hydrogen to uranium and more, at its disposal, it could design and build its own experiments to investigate its own structures. The knowledge it would obtain, it could use to redesign itself in better ways. The Artilect would learn zillions of times more about the world and itself than human scientists will ever know. It would be truly godlike in its knowledge and power to manipulate the world. As its knowledge of the world increases, that is, its science, it could transform itself via that new knowledge. It could apply technological principles to itself, the way human scientists and technologists tend to do with objects external to themselves. Human knowledge is said to double every 10 years or so. Let us call the total quantity of human knowledge at the year 2000 a THKU, Total Human Knowledge Unit. What would the Artilect's rate of knowledge growth be in THKUs per second? It takes 10 years for roughly 10 billion people to double their knowledge. Even if the Artilect had the same intelligence level as humans per unit of matter, which we say above is unlikely, it could still vastly outperform the human population because of its much larger mass and processing speed. 10 billion humans processing for 10 years is how many bits flips total? That's 10 to the 10, the number of people, times 10 by 365 by 24 by 60 by 60, the number of seconds in 10 years, times 10 to the power 16, that's the bits per second processing speed of one human brain, that is 10 to the power 10 plus 9 plus 16, that is 10 to power 35 bits. An Artilect can process 10 to power 55 bits a second, that is 10 to the 20 THKUs per second, that is nearly trillions of trillions. Of course, with its vastly superior intelligence level, it could do the above zillions of times faster, but that would be hard to calculate. If you don't follow the math, don't worry, just accept the bottom line, that the Artilect is doing everything faster and better than humans by factors of trillions at least. I should add that the above calculations are based on traditional classical computing principles. If such an Artilect were to use quantum computing, the resulting numbers involved would make the above numbers seem hugely too small. Probably books will be written shortly on the potential capacities of Artilects, and I hope this book will inspire such authors. I could probably go on and on about how astronomically superior an Artilect could be.